We're here in beautiful Beaver Creek Cattle and Elk Ranch, and we've got some stories for you right here on Living Legacies of the Ozarks. Welcome to Living Legacies of the Ozarks. My name is Hayden Head, and I am delighted to be with Mr. Leon Combs at his beautiful home at Beaver Creek Elk and Cattle Ranch in Bradleyville, Missouri, in the heart of the Ozarks. Leon was born in Forsyth, grew up in Bradleyville, then after serving in the Marines, graduated from the University of Missouri School of Journalism. From Columbia to St. Louis, he pursued his career there. Some 25 years with Jostens as a top sales representative, selling yearbooks to high schools and to colleges at the same time that he owned 5 campuses of Sanford Brown College. I don't believe I've ever known anyone that owned a college campus. Right. Well, that's going to be interesting. And 3 locations of the Amtech truck driving school. So a very successful career. When in 1994, Leon and his wife Dot decided to come back to the Ozarks, come back to Bradleyville, and then they began building their beautiful home on Bugle Mountain. It was here that Leon wrote his best-selling book, Bradleyville Basketball, The Hicks from the Sticks, as well as another memoir, Bradleyville, My Hometown. And by the way, Hicks from the Sticks, there's some talk, and I look forward to talking to Leon about this, about turning that book into a movie. Leon and Dot built another home here on Bugle Mountain to support the charitable organizations such as Boys and Girls Club of the Ozarks and Skaggs Hospital. Dot passed away in July 2018, but Leon continues to build the legacy that they created together. It is my pleasure to be with you, Leon, today. I'm looking forward to our conversation and learning more about your love of the Ozarks and what you're doing now.
Thank you, Hayden. It's nice to be here. I'm glad you're here today.
Well, I tell you, I'm pleased that we came out to your home here on Bugle Mountain.
You've never been to Bradleyville, had you?
I may have driven through Bradleyville a long time ago on the way to Dora.
No, Bradleyville.
Is that right?
Well, Bradleyville is normally a destination if you're going. You don't go through Bradleyville going to anywhere. You have to be destined for Bradleyville.
Well, I have to say I didn't recognize anything when we came here, so I think it's the first time. I know it's my first time here to Beaver Creek Elk and Cattle Ranch, and it is gorgeous. And I think a good place to begin would be you were in St. Louis for 40 years. You're building your career, hugely successful, and then back to the Ozarks. And I'm wondering what inspired you to return to your home?
You know, I think when I left here, basically when I graduated from high school in 1953, I went to SMS at that time, SMS, now Missouri State, for 1 year, joined the Marine Corps, came back to University of Missouri, and ended up working for Jostens. Well, I was gone for 40 years, and I visited my parents on a weekend, but I didn't live here for 40 years. And I had decided when I left here, Bradleyville was so backward, I thought. You know, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water. We did maybe the last couple of years, but we didn't have running water. I mean, we had outhouses through my high school years. And I thought, well, I want something better than this. I was away, I had some degree of success. Dot just loved the place, and she said, why don't we consider moving down here? So I started seeing it with different eyes and seeing that. So we did. We bought several farms, and we lived in another place before we moved here, and just fell in love with the place all over again. So that was about in the late 80s, and we moved here temporarily in 1990, but I sold my business here permanently in 1994. So that's been 25, 30 years ago I've been retired.
Quite a while. And
Yeah.
so it was after you were living in one of the farmhouses that you purchased with the farm, but then you all began construction of your home here.
Started construction on the house in 1995 and finished in 98. We moved in here on April 14, 1998. It took about 3 years to build it, and that's be 25 years ago next April. Yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
That's amazing. Well, of course, this is Living Legacies of the Ozarks, and one of the things that I'm always interested in is, it's about people and about a place, and how those might interact, right? How is it that a topography or a place sort of shapes the character or the culture of a people? How have you seen that in your experience, not only living in Bradleyville, but say with your book, The Hicks from the Sticks, and these young players coming out. How do you see the way the Ozarks shape the people who live here?
Well, first of all, my story, I don't know if you know my story or not, but I was actually born in Forsyth, taken to Colorado Springs when I was a baby. My parents died tragically when I was 20 months old. I was taken to California. I was going to be put in an orphanage in California, and they called back to Missouri and talked to my deceased mother's brother. And he said, we'll take that baby, send him back to us. So an old lady brought me on the train from Sacramento to Springfield in the summer of 1937 when I was 2 years old. And the mailman brought me from Springfield to Bradleyville to my new parents. So then my son did a video recently of my life, and he said, Dad, I'm going to show this at your funeral, a part of it. He said, is there anything you want to say? I said, well, one thing I want to say, I want to thank the people in the community of Bradleyville for giving me a home, for giving me the family, giving me the love, giving me a community. And that's kind of the way I feel about here. Bradleyville has, all of my life, has given me everything I've ever needed to be a good person. And if I haven't been good, it's not their fault. It's my fault. Yes.
Right. Wow. That is an amazing story. No, I didn't know that. No, I think you're right about integrity and being a person of your word and just, being able to rely on that, because everything depends on that.
Reliability and just helping each other. And it was just common, if one farmer needed to put up hay today, his neighbor would help him, and then never paid each other, and they would exchange work.
We were talking briefly before the interview, and you mentioned a family who lost their home in a fire.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you would just share that story.
Good example. This happened here just a couple months ago here in Bradleyville. One of the well-respected families, I won't give you their name, but they were away and their house burned to the ground. Everything they had burned up, and they had no place to go. So the local people right away, it was a week or two later, they had a fundraiser at the school. And most people who live around Bradleyville are working people, they're farmers. They're not rich people, they don't have a lot of money to give away or throw away. They had a fundraiser at the Bradleyville gym on a Saturday. And everybody brought things. They'd bring farm equipment, they'd bring shotguns to sell, they'd bring a tractor or sell some animals. That one day at Bradleyville, they raised in cash $68,000 for that family and gave it to them, and then they helped them rebuild their house. And so that's something that I don't know how many other communities you would see that happen.
I love that story.
That was initiated, that's a true story, that's very current.
That's great.
And that's typical. That goes back to the, what do you call it, when the people would go in to help you build a log house?
Like a barn raising or something
barn
like
raising
that,
or log raising. They'd come
raising.
in and build. Well, the first house I bought over here, 160 acres, I've got a model of it at the White River Valley Historical Society. And I know the family, I got a picture of the Floyd family. They had 14 kids. I got a picture of the whole family, and the mother and father and all the kids. And Hubert Floyd lived to be 100 years old. My uncle told me that was built in a log raising in 1875. His parents had a log raising in 1875, and the people came in and helped them build the house.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great story. Thank you for joining us here at Living Legacies of the Ozarks, and we're going to be right back.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy.
So, Leon, tell me, how did the idea for Bradleyville basketball, the Hicks from the Sticks, come about? You had your degree, you earned your degree in
Yes.
journalism from University of Missouri. One question I wanted to ask you that's related, is this the first time that you sort of invested your writing skills in a book? But I guess the more general question is, how did it come about?
Yes, well, as you say, I graduated from the School of Journalism in 1960, went to work for Jostens, and I developed other businesses and never did write. Probably never did learn to write well, period. But later on, after I retired, I was with my brother Joe, and he and I were going up to Camden, Missouri, and we stopped at a place to eat. And I said, all these years, I've always wished I could write something. And he said, they had some great basketball teams at Bradleyville back in the 60s. And he said, the kids at school now don't even remember that, don't even know about it. Some of their parents and grandparents played in those games. He said, why don't you write a book about that? So I started gathering material. I traveled around the state. I interviewed teams that they had played in the finals. I interviewed old coaches and old players who were now grown, some of them old men. And I had just a great time gathering the story. And almost everybody interviewed said, well, the night we played Bradleyville, we just had a bad night. I said, well,
Right.
Almost everybody had a bad night.
A lot of bad nights, yeah, right.
So they had a great time, and as you know, they won the state championship in 1962 under Coach Ray Gibson, and later on, Coach R.J. Ellison came. Mm-hmm. He was from Lead Hill, Arkansas. I think it was his first year of coaching. He came in, and he won 2 more state championships. And Bradleyville set a record that still stands today, 64 game high school, 64 games, undefeated, consecutive games. It is tied by another school, but it has never been broken.
Wow.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories, and there are a lot of good stories in that book. It's a lot of fun to read, but is that final game with Howardville, the Howardville Hawks. It's,
Yep.
it's the Bradleyville Eagles,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
So they're facing off for the state championship. And there's so much that's so rich about that.
Yes, sir.
I mean, and we could talk about that, but it's the coach, R.J. Ellison, that kind of catches your attention because he's so nervous when he's on the sidelines and he's coaching the boys that he has to have a plastic bucket
To throw up in.
Yeah,
man.
That's an extraordinary story. And you have this image of him with that, and then he's talking to the guys and he's coaching them on what to do. What can you tell us about Arjul as a coach and about the guys and their success?
Arjul was a great coach. He came up here from Arkansas. He went to school in Oklahoma, but he also went to college at Arkansas Tech in Russellville. Mm-hmm. But he came up here with no coaching experience, took these boys over, and had a great winning percentage. But this particular game you're talking about, Bradleyville had won the state championship the year before, 1967. And then in 1968, they went most of the 67 season. They lost a game the first of the 67 season. They played most of the 67 season without losing another game. They entered the 68 season, won every game. They played in a blue and gold tournament in Springfield where all the big schools play the little schools. They beat the big schools. In one game they played Parkview in a semifinal game. Parkview had won the state championship the year before. They were called the Jolly Green Giants. Parkview had 2,000 students in high school. Bradleyville had 75. And that morning on the KWTO radio, they were talking about the upcoming game tonight because Bradleyville was going to play Parkview, both undefeated. And the guy called in and he said, well, Bradleyville may be good down there in Boondocks playing those little schools. But he said, the Hicks and Sticks will meet their match tonight. The Hicks and Sticks, that's where the title came from. They beat Parkview soundly that night.
Nice.
And during the game, Gary Kellner told me, he was on the team, he said, Dwayne Maggard, that played for Bradleyville, always had a comb in his sock. He'd comb his hair during timeout. And they'd call timeout. They were close to the Parkview bench. He was combing his hair. One of the guys said, you always comb your hair during the game? And he said, put his comb back and said, only when I know we're going to win and get our pictures took.
That is good.
They went ahead.
That is good.
The Parkview game and the Howardville game, they were matched up in a final for the state championship. And they had won 63 consecutive games. And the Howardville was heavily favored. Newspapers, everybody favored Bradleyville is done for now. So they went in there, they played the game. Ended tied. They played overtime. The game is tied. They played a second overtime. The game is tied. They played a third overtime. The game is tied. And the fourth overtime, Bradleyville won it. They had won every sportsmanship trophy they'd ever played. They were great sportsmen, and they had won every sportsmanship trophy offered in tournaments until that one. And they asked, the officials came down and said, we could award it to both teams, but since you won the championship, we're going to give it to Howardville. And Lonnie Combs told me all the boys gave an applause to that because they respect him so much.
Excellent. Well, and it brings me something to sports and athletics, maybe more generally speaking, that it is the arena where your success depends on your hard work, your discipline, your expertise, which is I think is what makes sports so excellent. And I know that you were honored by the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. And I was wondering if you would just speak to that. I'm sure that a large part of your contribution was the book itself. But tell me more about your interest in sports and what you see perhaps principally of value in good competition.
Most coaches I know teach fair play, they teach honesty, they teach hard work, all the things that we need to be successful. So I see that all the time. And the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame invited me to serve on the board. And I think this is basically when the book came out. And so I was pleased to serve on the board, and they honored the Bradleyville basketball team was the first team to be enshrined as a team in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame.
That's great.
And
That's great.
I like that because they had the big enshrinement one afternoon in Springfield, and Gerald Andrews had invited all the Bradleyville players to come in. So I gathered most of the guys up, and we took about that. We all had lunch and enjoyed it. And people were interviewing, and I had a bunch of books there to sell because they had just come out. And I invited all the guys to my house here for a barbecue that evening. The Coach Ellison was here, Ray Gibson was here, and somebody yelled at me. The TV was on. They said, "Come in here." I was being interviewed on all 3 channels at the same time at Sports Eddy. You talk about selling books. I mean, Barnes & Noble couldn't keep in stock. Amazon was running out, and so it worked well.
I saw that Hicks from the Sticks, Bradleyville basketball, was like #1 in Missouri for 18 months in Amazon.
No, 18 weeks.
18
weeks in a row. It was #1 on Amazon, 18 weeks in a row for the state of Missouri. And that's when the Harry Potter book came out.
Oh my goodness, that's great. That's great.
We had a book signing in Barnes & Noble in Springfield, and people were lined up, and about every other book was Harry Potter and Hicks from the Sticks.
That's good.
Line for 2 months. We had a book signing. We had all the players up there, and you had to stand in line 2 hours to get your book card because all these players, everybody would want to talk to David Combs or Leon Boyd or whoever they were. They'd have to stop and talk, so I had to move people along.
Keep moving along.
Yeah.
So going back to the team, going back to this phenomenal success, 64-0.
Yep.
Right. 2 state championships.
3 eventually.
3 eventually, but 2 back-to-back.
Back to back. Yep.
So what would you say was most instrumental to the success of the Bradleyville Eagles?
Well, first of all, you have to have some pretty good talent. You know, any coach will tell you, if you're going to win games, you got to have good players. And secondly, we did have an excellent coach. I had 2 good coaches, Ray Gibson and R.J. Ellison. And then with the boys, to them, it was a playful game. They loved the game. A good example of this is, Arjo told me that after they won this third state championship, they were having a big rally in the school gym back Bradleyville. They were having a big rally one afternoon, and all the people were there, and they were playing the band and so forth. And David Combs was sitting by R.J. Ellison. He said, "Coach, when is this thing going to be over? What bass season opens today?" So they didn't take their basketball too seriously. They didn't go to AAU camps all summer. They just played basketball during the season, and the rest of the time they were fishing and they were drag racing. So they loved to play basketball, and they knew each other. These guys all knew each other from the time they were children, and it just became part of their lives. And I don't know, it was a phenomenon that happened and has not happened again. Maybe it was just an anomaly that they had those great teams for that period. But there was something that carried over from year to year from the first state championship.
I was going to ask you another question that's related to this too. When I read your book, like I said, especially in the games, I mean, you can feel the tension in the crowd and the enthusiasm, and you get a sense of the play. But clearly, basketball. How did you acquire so much knowledge about the game so that you could write it so technically on point?
In all fairness, I don't know that much. When I played basketball at Bradleyville, we didn't have a gymnasium until halfway through my senior year. We played on an outdoor court. I played on the varsity team 4 years. We lost every game except 2. Branson beat us one time 64-6. So my knowledge of basketball, to answer your question, when I finished the book, I had 2 or 3 people who do know it well to read this and help me out with some of the things. So I got a lot of the technical stuff from people who really know the game better than I do.
It was just so well done.
I'm a better storyteller than I am writer.
Oh, yeah. It's a great story. It's a great story. Well, thank you again for joining us here at Living Legacies of the Ozarks. We're going to be back in just a moment.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy.
Welcome back to Living Legacies of the Ozarks. Welcome back to Leon Combs and his stories about Bradleyville basketball, Hicks from the Sticks, Bradleyville itself, and a whole lot more. And Leon, I wanted to ask you, you talked about some of the hardships, the deprivations of Bradleyville early on, but even in the 60s. I mean, people had electricity, but they didn't have water then. And so, we're spoiled now with all the conveniences. What was the attitude of people back, say, in the 60s or late 50s?
They were happy. People were happy. I probably was never happier when I lived here in those days. People were happy. They didn't know what they didn't have. They didn't miss these things because they never had them. And a good example of that is I talked to the boys about an incident where they were delivering the Springfield paper on a Saturday night. They used to have a route. They'd pick up the papers in Chadwick. They'd have to fold them and put them in circles, put rubber bands around them. They'd take out, they had a route over around Reeder and the Taneyville, and they'd throw the paper. And so they did this one night, Donald Horner, David Combs, and one or two others. And they finished the route like 2 o'clock in the morning. That was 2 o'clock Sunday morning. They were hungry. Boys are always hungry. And so, they said, well, you can't go. There's no place open. In fact, in those days, there was no McDonald's or anything, but not around here. So David Combs said, well, I run over a rabbit on the way over here tonight. Let's go see if we can find it. So they went over there and looked in the ditch. Sure enough, they found the rabbit. They went up to a sawmill on top of the hill, and they got some kindling. They built a fire. They skinned the rabbit, put a skewer on it, and they sitting there and roasting the rabbit, and they were sitting there listening to coon dogs. And David Combs said, I think that's old Rex Maggard's coon. He's treed over there. I could hear that coon to a dog in the distance, and they were sitting there. And Donald Horner said, I think he said, David said, boys, ain't many people as lucky as we are to be here tonight. Here we are, they were eating roadkill, and 2 o'clock in the morning, he said, we're among the luckiest people in the world.
Listening to a coon hound on a
They were
ridge
happy.
somewhere.
They were happy, and they were happy with themselves. They were happy with their families. And so the answer is, well, there was a lot of poverty, a lot of poor people. They didn't have a lot of things, but they were as happy probably as a lot of millionaires were. Yep.
Leon, this is a tricky question. I don't know that anybody has the answer to it. Is there any way to recover that? Do you think people can live into that kind of contentment again?
I think of course the answer should be yes, and maybe it is. I wish it were, but one of the problems we have nowadays is we are so bombarded with information, whether it's our cell phone or TV or car radio, whatever, every way we look or listen, we were bombarded with information. And those days we didn't have that. We didn't have television. We didn't have cell phones. I'm not advocating that we go back to those days, but those days people were happier because they didn't have this to deal with.
That raises another question that's in tandem with that one. What would be the one thing about the Ozarks that you would want to see preserved in the face of these technological and sociological changes?
Wow. It's so hard to find something that's not available other places too.
Correct.
It's easy to say that love and togetherness and hard work, but that could apply
That's
anywhere.
True. Right.
But I think there is a certain sense of community here that's unusual, and there's a certain sense of love among neighbors who really truly love each other. They defend each other. They like to take care of their own problems, and it's a hard question for me to answer. And what do I would like to see preserved? Why can't we move this kind of happiness and love to other parts of the country? I'm afraid that's impossible to do. I think that we see more and more people moving in here from all over the country. People from California and the East Coast are coming in right around here and buying land, and they're paying outrageous prices for it. I think because they want to get away from all the stress and bad news. And so I don't know. I can't really answer your question, but it's like so many things. Someone said, I can't explain it to you, but you'll know it when you feel it.
Right.
And so
it's one of the trickiest things about the Ozarks because we love our home. We feel like it's exceptional. But you're right. When you look at what we share with other cultures like Appalachia, wherever, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. And yet we all know there's something that we don't want to lose.
Something special here.
There's something special, but naming what that something special is always a challenge.
I'm going with a friend to New York City in a couple of weeks to see Hamilton. And I'll go up there and I'll enjoy that for about 3 days, and I'll be anxious to get back home.
That's right. It's a good place to come.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you another more personal question. I know that you all built a home here to support charitable organizations like Skaggs Hospital, now Cox, the Boys and Girls Club of America, maybe others that you might want to mention. How does that work? How do you use the home to support these other organizations?
When my dear late wife passed away, when she and I planned this, we said, she said, this is so ostentatious. So I said, honey, we'll use this to raise money. We'll use it as this for good. And we did. Right away when we moved in here, we had the first Skaggs Bash here, raised $100,000 out here. And we brought people over from Branson. We brought Ride the Ducks over with Ann and Bob McDowell. We went across Beaver Creek and the elk pastures. We raised it again next year. One of the things I'm proud of is the Bradleyville Scholarship Program, where we started this walk run. It lasted for 25 years. And we raised money every year, and we initiated a program where every graduating senior would get a $1,000 scholarship for every year he or she remained in a college or an accredited trade school. And that still is going on. We ended up with $330,000 in the Community Foundation endowment for the Bradleyville Scholarship Program. That was done here. Then after each run, we would invite all the community to come up to our house. We would open the gates. We'd bring everybody up here. We'd have coffee and desserts, and people would walk around here for hours and just enjoy it. And this is the way and each year it got bigger and bigger, and raised more and more money because more and more people like to come. Not just for the run, it was a great run, but at the run we had free food. We had hamburgers and all sorts of things to give to the runners free of charge.
And so you've got that scholarship endowed now.
It's endowed.
Perpetuity.
It's
so
endowed.
It just keeps.
Yes. Keeps growing.
What a great gift to the community.
Yeah, the Community Foundation has done a great job of growing the money, and the kids are still there.
That's great. So I'm also interested in your ranch, Beaver Creek Elk and Cattle Ranch, and particularly the elk. There's something about elk that seems to capture people's imagination. Have you brought elk to your ranch, or how does that work?
Yes, back in the 90s, I was raising feeder calves, and prices were really low, 60, 70 cents a pound. I was losing money every year. I bought a bunch of cattle, losing money. I read a farm magazine about people who were raising Rocky Mountain elk, and they were making profits on it. And I called a friend of mine in North Missouri, and he said, yeah, that's good. So I started buying elk, and they were hard to buy because they were very expensive in those days. But I bought a bunch of elk, and we brought them in here, built fences, built a barn, 8-foot-high fences. I ended up about 150 at one time, close to 200 elk. The elk became a complete curiosity. We've had thousands of people come over here, even still, they'll come by, drive through. I made a special road called Elk Lane where they can drive through and see the elk.
Excellent. And so you still have elk on the place?
We have about 40 elk right now. Nice. We just had a bunch of new babies, and we've got some bulls now and cows, and we got a couple of really nice big bulls, beautiful bulls. I try to get some of the gigantic bulls with gigantic antlers. That's what everybody wants to see on the elk. And so they do a pretty good job of throwing their genetics. And if you got a big bull, here's your herd sire, they usually have babies that have big antlers too.
That's great. That's great. Listen, thank you so much for having me in your beautiful home and telling me your stories about your life and about Bradleyville. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Hayden.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us at Living Legacies of the Ozarks. Have a great day.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy,